Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I'll be looking at the facets of the personality trait openness to experience. Openness to experience is one of the personality traits on the five-factor model. And we can remember this through the acronym OCEAN. Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Each of these personality traits has 6 facets. And to really understand someone's personality, you have to look at the facet level scores. Here I'll be looking at the facets for openness to experience. Now there are a few ways to measure personality traits and a few ways to measure even personality traits conceptualized just on the five-factor model. One popular instrument is the Neo PIR. I'll refer to this as the Neo. And another popular method is through the International Personality Item Pool. I'll refer to this as International. The facets I'll be looking at here are international. The first facet on the international is imagination. So with this facet, a high-scoring individual would tend to be involved in a lot of fantasy. They would look at the world as it is, as too boring or plain, and they would add fantasy through imagination to make things more interesting, to get a better experience. Somebody who scores low on imagination really is more oriented toward factual information. They don't really have much value. They don't place much value on fantasy. On the Neo, this facet is referred to as fantasy. So imagination for the international, fantasy for the Neo. The next facet is artistic interests. On the Neo, this is referred to as aesthetics. And somebody who scores high here on artistic interests has a high interest in art. Now this deals with somebody's interest in and appreciation for art, not somebody's ability to be creative and create artwork. However, that ability is somewhat positively associated with artistic interests. The next facet is emotionality. On the Neo, this is referred to as feelings. Somebody who scores high on emotionality has good access to their feelings, they understand what they're feeling, and they tend to be more expressive with feelings. The next facet is adventurousness. On the Neo, this is referred to as actions. And somebody who has a high score in adventurousness really wants to try new activities. They tend to be more oriented toward traveling and experiencing different things. They don't like routine, and things that are familiar, like schedules, tend to be more spontaneous. People who score low on adventurousness tend to be uncomfortable when a routine or schedule is altered. They like things to be the way they've always been, and they like to stay in a certain routine. Next we move to intellect. On the Neo, this is referred to as ideas. And the intellect facet really deals with individuals who like to debate. They like philosophy. They like intellectual challenges like riddles and puzzles. They're always looking for the next intellectual challenge. When we look at the personality trait of openness to experience in general, we know that it does have a positive correlation, even though it's relatively weak, with intelligence. And a lot of that correlation we see loaded here on this intellect facet, as opposed to the other facets of openness to experience. So intellect doesn't measure intelligence. It measures a tendency to be interested in learning new things and be challenged. It has an association with intelligence. An individual who scores low on intellect tends to like to deal with people, interact with people as opposed to ideas. And usually they don't appreciate philosophy and theory as much as they do concrete thinking. They tend to view intellectual activities as a poor use of time. So the intellect facet really deals with an intellectual style as opposed to an intellectual ability. That brings us to the last facet for openness to experience, and on the international, that's liberalism. On the Neo, it's referred to as values. Now this is an interesting facet. This facet deals with the tendency to rebel against authority, to not like rules, to sympathize with other people who break rules, and at extremes, to value chaos and disorder. Individuals who score low on liberalism like traditional values and tend to conform. So we could think of this as unconventional versus conventional. One of the questions I get here sometimes on this last facet of liberalism is it tied to political affiliation? Meaning, is somebody who scores higher on liberalism more likely to be a liberal, and someone who scores low on liberalism more likely to be a conservative? There is some association with political affiliation. It's not particularly strong. Really, the liberalism facet is more about, as I mentioned, being unconventional versus conventional than it is about being affiliated with a particular party. It's important to understand with these facets for openness to experience, as well as the facets for all the personality traits, that even though in general they tend to move together, they don't have to for any specific individual. It's not unusual to meet an individual who has a high score on intellect and a high score on artistic interests, but a low score on liberalism. So we can see a variety of scores on these facets. That's why it's so important to look at the facet scores when trying to figure out personality, when evaluating personality, rather than just looking at the big 5 traits. Somebody could be somewhere in the middle on openness to experience, but very high on intellect, very high on imagination, but really low on artistic interests. We don't typically expect that type of pattern where some of the facets are very high and some are very low, but it can happen. I hope you found this description of the facets of openness to experience to be interesting. Thanks for watching.